Welcome to the first ever exceptional podcast. We have started a brand new series where we're going to be doing a deep dive into different areas related to neurodivergence with experts from all over the world. Today, I've got an amazing guest that I'm super excited to introduce to all of you. Their name is Georgia Shaw, and what a badass they are. They are currently the Associate Client Executive at EOS IT Professional. They have a first class honours in project management, but maybe not in the conventional way that you might assume degrees to be. Hence leading us onto our subject today. They are a Tech Woman 100, not too shabby. They have an award in Rising Star Digital. They are a TEDx speaker, and may I say a fellow TEDx speaker. We did it together, and honestly, by far one of the highlights. And they have awards coming out of the woodworks. They have a lot of experience on championing apprenticeships and alternative ways of learning, which basically is what we're all about. So without further delay, let's bring on the guest. Georgia, great to have you.
An introduction. Man, you hype me up. I feel like a celebrity right now.
I couldn't think of a better person to talk about this alternative way. Before we get into the weeds of it, I'd love to know a bit of an introduction from your side. Who you are, what's your kind of relationship to neurodiversity and apprenticeships, and then we'll just casually go for a few questions.
So, I'm Georgia. Lovely to meet you all. And I started my career in a bit of an unconventional way. I was at a secondary school that really pushed the university route, and I just wasn't really sure what a psychology degree was going to do for me, because that was the subject that I felt most passionate about. And despite my teachers encouraging me to actually go down the university route, I ended up having a bit of a heart-to-heart honest conversation with my dad. And he was the one who encouraged me to think, if the degree is not going to help me get to the next stage of my career, then what am I doing it for? And should I really actually be doing it? So that was when I started looking at all different sorts of apprenticeships. I really wasn't committed to a certain area, but through reading loads of job descriptions, I ended up retrofitting where I thought my skills were to project management. And so that was how I started on a level 4 project management apprenticeship at EOS. I then worked my way up and did my project management degree, as Nat said. And I'm now on apprenticeship number 3, which is a master's degree from Cranfield University in management and leadership. So it's been a really exciting journey. And then to talk a little bit about my relationship and experience with neurodiversity. So couple of different things, actually. I used to be a teacher of karate, and so I actually taught a class specifically for children with special educational needs. It wasn't entirely my class, I was an assistant instructor, but that did give me some exposure to working with children with neurodiverse needs. I also lived with a foster brother that had neurodiverse needs, and I've mentored an apprentice recently who was neurodiverse, and we managed to get him through his endpoint assessment really successfully, which was an experience that I was so privileged to be a part of. So I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but I've had those sorts of experiences that I think have helped me to understand a little better. And I'm really excited to be here and intertwine the two topics together in a really amazing way.
Amazing. That was obviously really interesting and what a career you've had. One of the highlights was that you teach karate. I was like, what a badass. Now, I think we need to go back a little bit, because while I know you talk about apprenticeships all the time, I'm pretty certain not everyone's going to really know exactly what they are. And I think just to give a bit of context about why I wanted to talk about apprenticeships today is that while I have a degree and a master's, honestly, it was not easy. And to be truth be told, if I knew there was an alternative route to do what I wanted to do, I would have done it, because it wasn't really suited towards my mindset. So while you absolutely do not have to be neurodivergent in order to do an apprenticeship, I do find that they can actually be very complementary with each other. So I think who better to really explain what it is and compare it to the traditional route than yourself. So yeah, what is an apprenticeship, and why might someone who is neurodivergent, or simply put, someone who has different ways of doing things,
brilliant
consider
question.
one?
So I'll start with what actually an apprenticeship is. Simply put, apprenticeships combine working and studying in a mutually complementary way. It's a way to earn while you learn, and apprenticeships start at level 3 and go all the way up to level 7. Level 3, you would be eligible for once you turn 6, and that's equivalent to 2 A levels. Then level 4 is equivalent to a foundation degree. Level 5 and 6 are your bachelor's degree levels. And then level 7 is equivalent to a master's degree. And they are offered in a wide variety of different fields. As Nat said, I'm in IT, but you've got all sorts of different industries that offer apprenticeships. Some are more practical and hands-on, and some are more, let's say, corporate and office-based. And I think that was once quite a misconception about apprenticeships, that they were only for manual trades and you could only do an apprenticeship in something like bricklaying or something that's very practical, but that's definitely no longer the case. And the fact that you can come out with a master's degree in an apprenticeship is something that I really do want to make clear, because it's something that just not a lot of people think about, but it's an incredible opportunity. And I've heard of a lot of people who have actually maybe gone down the university route and then topped up their learning with apprenticeships. Because the way they work is that companies over a certain size have to set money aside into what's known as an apprenticeship levy fund. And I'm not an expert on this at all, but how I understand this is that they either use those funds to invest in further education for their colleagues, or they lose them. So it's absolutely in companies' interests to invest in apprenticeships. And then the second half of that question, why might a neurodivergent person consider an apprenticeship, or anyone that's got a different way of learning? The first thing that came to my mind was just the fact that it gives you a little bit more structure. And I think there's structure at university in that you have lectures to attend, and you might have a part-time job, and you've got things at set times. But then it's ultimately really up to you. No one's going to force you to go to a lecture. No one's going to force you to get out of bed in the morning. Whereas with an apprenticeship, you're still working 9 to 5. You've got set content that you need to learn, and you'll be on a set apprenticeship, like doing different bits at different times. You've then got the support of line managers. You'll have tutors, buddies that are all put in place by a company to help you be successful. I think that structure is something that really comes to mind when I think of what could be helpful, just because it's quite a hard adjustment, either going from school or college to either an apprenticeship and like the working world, or university. Either way, it's like a real step change from when you're at school and possibly living with parents, and you've got that safety blanket of just the school lives and your friends and teachers being there for you, to then go and have like real responsibilities either way. I just think that extra little bit of structure could be something quite helpful, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Obviously, when we talk about neurodivergence, it's ridiculously broad, and there isn't really a one size fits all, but there are definitely some overlapping qualities which you see across the board. And it might be that because you do things slightly different, you need to have more flexibility. And I find apprenticeships do tend to be more bespoke, because they're very much led by the organization opposed to traditional academia. You're right, though. When I initially thought of apprenticeships, I just thought someone in a high vis essentially doing that. And that kind of put me off a bit, because I suppose you don't want the prestige, but you expect that other people will require it. And there are a lot of subjects which a alternative approach would have been beneficial. While not an apprenticeship, I remember during my GCSEs, I completely failed my maths. Like, it was terrible. But then I redid it in college, and I did it in the module. So I did one module, then another module. So essentially lots of mini exams rather than one big exam. And then I got a really good grade. And it just showed me that it isn't to do with intelligence, it's to do with the way that it is presented to you. And I think apprenticeships really show you that there's again, I don't know where this expression came from, but more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
It does the job.
A bit gruesome, but
We briefly mentioned it. I would love to go into a bit more detail about your own pathway. What's stopping you going down a conventional university, living on campus placement? Was it something that you fell into? Was it something that you actively sought out? And in hindsight, any regrets, or do you think it was the best thing for you? So a lot to unpack there.
no, that's a really good question. So as I said, it started for me after that conversation with my dad. And that made me think, about what I was looking to get out of the situation. And for me, the fear was going to university, wanting that prestige, as you say, and wanting that sort of university lifestyle, but then coming out and actually being behind where I thought I could have been. I hear the graduate job market is quite a challenging place to be, and you need to have quite a lot that sets you apart, because nowadays it's possibly not as much of a distinguishing factor to have a degree, because they are a lot more people go and seek a degree. So for me, it was about wanting to get experience, and also, I'm not going to lie, the financial benefits of an apprenticeship really spoke out to me as well. I remember my dad saying to me, if you be a bit brave here and go against the grain, by the time your friends are coming from university and potentially having to move home, you could actually be moving out and you could be getting on the property ladder. And that was actually exactly what happened. I was able to save up whilst doing my apprenticeship because I was living at home while I was doing it. And also COVID probably had something to do with that. The fact that there was nothing else to spend my money on. So 90% of it got saved up. And that was what I was able to do by going down that alternative route. So that was another factor for me. And that was more of a strategic decision. And do I have any regret? I really don't. I think I would have enjoyed university and I think I would have had a great time. I would have gone clubbing 4 days a week. I would have probably drunk enough tequila for the rest of my life. But I just think that I wouldn't trade it for where I am now, especially coming out with the same qualification that I could have got at university. And I also do think that with this master's degree that I'm doing at Cranfield, which is such an amazing institution, I feel really proud that to end up at this sort of prestigious postgraduate university, even though I didn't do the traditional academic prestigious university route.
Okay, no, I think that's it. You know, when you say it, it's hard to argue against it. It sounds like a really good option. And another kind of thing from my experience is that as someone who has employed people, honestly, graduate, you have to teach them to unlearn everything they've learned to then reteach them again, because it's a real thing. I remember quite a while ago now, during the 2012 Olympics, I got this amazing opportunity to work as a camera rigger, another lifetime. But anyway, there were apprenticeships on the team, and there was me who was also at university, but was just doing a bit of a placement. And to be honest, I was pretty useless because I knew all the theory, but they gave me a little microphone to communicate. I didn't even know how to use it. And I remember my manager saying, this is the problem with degrees. They do not teach you the things that are actually useful. And the things they teach you are going to be out of date by the time you actually get into a position where they might have been useful.
One of the particular examples that I've got for this is cybersecurity. The way cybersecurity is taught at university on a degree and the way it's actually applied in companies is just completely different. And so you almost have to, even if you go and study cybersecurity, you have to completely relearn it when you get into the working world, because they can't replicate the way that like threat detection actually happens in a company. Like, it's just like apples and oranges is what I've heard. So I hear that it's a real struggle, and that also is just a shame because the amount of time and energy and effort that gets invested into learning what is meant to be best practice, only to have to unlearn it. You did think, What was that for then?
I suppose, without getting too much into the neuroscience of things, our brain is continuously rewiring. That takes up a lot of energy. And if you are neurodivergent, recreating those pathways takes a lot more time and concentration and patience. I'd rather do it right the first time. Truth be told, I probably would have gone down that route had it been more available in a diverse range of subjects. I said before, you'd think it would only for bricklaying.
Yeah.
In other areas, to your knowledge, what other subjects could you do an apprenticeship in?
Oh, wow. Okay. Some unexpected ones that come to mind are law. It's like business admin, there's software development, hairdressing. There are the practical ones like bricklaying, carpentry. I want to say gardening, but I'm sure I've seen one of those before.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is just, I feel like any industry you could picture going into, there is some sort of apprenticeship. I'm not saying it will be exactly the same, but I'm fairly confident in saying that you can get a foot in the door through almost any industry through an apprenticeship.
Yeah. And how does it work? Are you guaranteed a job afterwards, or is it just you're more likely to with that organization?
Yeah.
Like, what's the guarantees?
So it's different at every company, just to make it nice and confusing. And it really is down to the discretion of the company. Some do hire for specific schemes and then they can choose whether to keep an apprentice on. But then what my logic says to me is, why would a company employ you, invest in you, only to know that they're not going to keep you on? So I think that there's a bit of, I think maybe companies might use that as a bit of a risk buffer. Let's say that they have someone pass the apprenticeship, but then maybe doesn't display the necessary behaviours and skills to continue in the role, that it's a bit of a risk buffer so that they have a way to not be contractually obliged to keep them. But if you're, again, I don't feel like people go into apprenticeships not to give it 100%. So if you're going in, you're doing everything right by the book, you're making a good impression and you're delivering results. For me, it's like, why wouldn't a company want to keep you and keep investing in you?
Makes sense. I always thought it was a similar thing where it's a safety thing where I can't promise you a job in case you're terrible, but more often than not, you learn with them. They get to know you. And I think that's the key thing when a lot of the individuals I work with is that they are amazing employees, but you do have to get to know them first. You do have to understand their quirks, their differences, their spiky profile, as we call it.
I like that.
And that's what you gain. All right, so moving along, like we've talked about how great apprenticeships are, but if we're being real, there is still a lot of misunderstandings, myths, pre-held perceptions. So I want to know, what do you reckon we can do to help dispel these myths and to make them more appealing to people who have an alternative approach to education?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. How can we dispel the myths? Ultimately, I think it's just more people that actually go down the route, sharing their experiences. I think in podcasts like this, it's raising people on different platforms to actually share their experience. I know companies are getting more and more into social media, such as TikTok and Instagram, and trying to share different journeys. And I just think having honest conversations, it also starts at school. I'll say that for sure. And I know a lot of schools, just because I do a lot of these talks on apprenticeships, a lot of schools do have like apprentices come in and they have apprenticeship week where they'll celebrate and bring people in and like show students what that pathway looks like. But I don't know how equal the balance is within schools. So if I look back at my school journey, it was very much like we would have one apprenticeship evening, which students had to make the decision to actually come to. This is mandatory UCAS, university application skills and development workshops, which were actually in school hours. So I do think that a lot of this push does need to start at school. And something that I spoke about in my TEDx talk was that I'm not sure how this can change until schools actually define different metrics of success. Because at the moment,
Yeah.
schools are judged based on how many students go to university and not necessarily. And I don't know why that is, because I'd argue that if students are gaining apprenticeships, like whatever they are, but even if you think about if a student goes to Google or Microsoft as an apprentice, how challenging that must have been to actually get into. For me, it's like, how could that not be called out as a metric of success? But there's just no way to record it, perhaps. And so I think that that'll be a really big part of it. But I'm curious, what else do you think we can do now?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there with a changing perceptions early on in school and college, because I do know I went to sixth form and then I went to community college to do a foundation. So I got an understanding of how they both work. And in sixth form, there wasn't an option for apprenticeships. You're right. We had an hour every single week just for UCAS and applying. It was the go. And I think what they should do is so rather than looking at, okay, how many students do we get from college to university, broadening it out and say, how many of our students in, say, 5 years' time are in full-time employment?
Yeah.
And because unfortunately, me and my team support ridiculous amounts of overqualified neurodivergent individuals. And technically, they would be counted as a success because they've got masters, they've got doctorates, but they are unemployed. And the reason for it is that they have learnt to adapt to a certain lifestyle, and essentially they put all their eggs in one basket, and they haven't learnt the social skills, the kind of data interaction. So I think that would help. I also think we need to be essentially less snobby as a society because, say going to sixth form university is seen as you're doing well in life. Going to community college is seen as, oh, bless you didn't get your grades, did you? Yeah, let's salvage you.
Yeah.
And we know that's not true. But I think that is still, from my experience, the predominant way of thinking, that it's a consolation prize rather than an alternative career path.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And it's a big ask, isn't it? Asking the entire society to change their mindset. But I think these things start slow and gain momentum. And the thing that I feel is slightly more reassuring is that it's just taking more people to actually go against the grain, that then it becomes a supply and demand interaction where there's more demand for these apprenticeships, so more companies are offering them. And given that apprenticeships might have different ways to access them, then by default, these alternative routes like community college, etc., become a lot more recognised. And then in 10, 15 years' time, hopefully sooner, but I'm saying 10 as an arbitrary figure, these conversations like the one we're having shouldn't even be a thing, should they?
Yeah, people be like, oh, this podcast's boring. I've heard it all before. But sorry, at the moment, hopefully still very interesting.
Never boring.
No. In terms of, again, spreading awareness, you've been doing lots. And your TED Talk, which I'll try and link to, really is pushing us in the right direction. So it brings us nicely onto the next question. Have you, from doing your TED Talk and spreading awareness, have you seen any changes in attitudes or interesting conversations that have come from the back of it?
So it's worth noting at the time of filming, still less than 6 months since we did the TEDx talks. So not a long time in the grand scheme of life. Being so honest, I wouldn't say that I've noticed anything massive. I think that it's part of the process. What I hoped for and all I wanted when I did the TEDx talk was even just for one person to be on YouTube one day thinking, neurodiversity isn't right for me, and look and go and search for a talk on apprenticeships, stumble across mine, and they'll hear my talk about how apprenticeships challenge bias in higher education, and they could just have their perception broadened and just think in a different way. So I think that it's going to be on YouTube forever. Got a long time for these sorts of interactions to happen. But what I will say is the reaction that I get every time I go to one of these school events and even last night, I was presenting on public speaking and presenting at the Association of Apprenticeships meetup, which is a lovely event. I'd say the attitude has just it is changing. And at every single one of these talks, I have at least one conversation with someone that will say something to me like, oh, wow, I'd not thought of it like that before. Do you want to stay in touch? I think I might be interested. And so these are the conversations that are giving me a buzz and giving me energy, because that's what's showing me that slowly, even if it's one person by one person, that shift is happening.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with that, to be honest. I was hoping my TED Talk would change the world. And I think it can change a person's world, but changing the world is maybe a tall order. But I do think, you only have to watch yours to see it in itself changes stigma. You're very enthusiastic, very articulate, clearly very intelligent. And this isn't the traditional rags to riches story, which I actually think is positive, because you always hear the people like, I grew up on the wrong side of the rails and then I did an apprenticeship. And then, and that's a great story, but it reinforces this idea that apprenticeships are the backup option, where I think you've shown that you had every possibility to take a traditional route should you have wished to, and yet you chose not to, and it has worked out very well for you.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't get too hung up on these individual views, because one, like a view on a video doesn't tell you the impact. It's the conversations that might come a few years down the later saying, hey, I saw your video and it really made me see things differently.
No, that's so true. And I definitely agree with what you said.
Now, I'm going to change focus a bit. I know you've said you've spoken and worked with neurodivergent children before, and I'm curious to see how maybe that work has shaped your views of inclusion in the workplace. A bit of a broad question, but just your takes on how you have connected the two.
I think, especially with the experiences that I've had, I've seen absolute, I'm going to say brilliance at such a young age, but just in a different way. And I think that it's very easy for even like schools and workplaces to just want everything done in a similar way. And sometimes people will have different ways of getting the right answer, but it's not the way that you would have taken, but actually you still achieve what you need to achieve and you still get where you need to go. And that's the kind of link that I'm going to make here, where from what I've seen is that maybe tasks aren't done in the same way. There might be a bit more of a sort of snake path to go down than a direct route. But then that's where I'd link that back to the workplace. And so if you can encourage more workplaces to see the beauty in that journey rather than the just direct route, we need efficiency, we need numbers straight away, and actually like the creativity and like the out of the box thinking that I think sometimes neurodiverse people are able to bring to these workplaces. That's where I've got to, because I've seen it from that martial arts role to the workplace with my neurodiverse mentee. So hopefully that made sense.
Yes, yeah, we got there. And I think it just shows that there are multiple routes. It's a hard question to answer because everyone is so unique, but just seeing a couple of success stories of individuals who may otherwise have not really been able to progress in their life. I know in my TED Talk, I talk about the ridiculous amounts of unemployment in the neurodivergent community, and it's not because of lack of ability, it's due to a lack of flexibility.
Yeah.
And I think apprenticeships give people that flexibility in a way which kind of archaic systems like universities just simply do not.
Yeah.
I would much rather have had a process where I knew someone who knew me as an individual rather than just a number who was paying exorbitant fees. I like that. I think we got time for one more question, and I think this one is a really nice, optimistic and interesting one. It's that if you could redesign the apprenticeship model, what radical changes would you make to ensure true inclusion? So essentially, what is the next stage of evolution when it comes to apprenticeships to make them even more appealing to everyone?
Oh, you're really challenging me. That's really
I know. I know.
um,
So,
the one thing that comes to mind with this question is something that I saw from experience, and I don't know how it would work, but it's just a sort of something I've noticed. So sometimes I feel that apprenticeships, given how they're structured, and you can have all these additional, what's the word I'm thinking? What's it called when you get like reasonable adjustments? That's it.
yes.
So you're passing an exam essentially at the end of an apprenticeship. So you can have reasonable adjustments possible to include everyone to actually pass the exam. Then you go into a role, etc. But what then gets me is that sometimes what I've seen that the apprenticeships that people come in on are not actually the best suited to their skill sets. So, for example, my mentee was in service delivery, and to be a service delivery manager, you're someone that is like really able to cope with change. You're really like used to fast-paced and dynamic working. It's a stressful job. You've got the client constantly like changing their mind and wanting different things. And actually, sort of for his skill set, it just wasn't really a role that he's going to be comfortable with. So my dynamic radical change is, instead of encouraging people to apply for set schemes, we actually assess people as individuals and work out where we think their skills could be placed to add value within the business. As you say, neurodiversity is so broad. Some people are going to be really happy to cope with change and constantly be evolving. And some people need that steady sort of mechanical operational focus where it doesn't matter what changes are in the business environment, they're just doing their job every day. So instead of just having these reasonable adjustments to get everyone to pass the scheme and everyone's happy, I'd like to see a future of true inclusion where we identify that a person can add value from what they've already demonstrated in school, college, etc. And then we work with them to design the role where they will always be adding value.
I think that's a beautiful answer.
Thank you.
And essentially, it sounds like we need to stop apprenticeships falling down the same trap that conventional academics went down.
Yeah.
Because the more broader we make it, the more inclusive we potentially make it, the more streamlined and cookie cutter mold it becomes.
Yeah.
So try to keep that uniqueness, that more kind of personal touch to it.
Yeah, that's so true. And it'll be a challenge because it will take a lot more time and a lot more investment to make it work. But I just think the increase in value would just be exponential. I think it was so worthwhile. So in my ideal world, I'd love to be able to get to that place.
I think with people like you, we will get there.
Thank you.
I suppose any kind of like final thoughts or opinions, maybe what would you say to someone who is on the fence about knowing which direction should they go into? What could they do to make that decision?
Direct quote from my TEDx talk: different people need different conditions to be successful. So just because something worked for your sister, your mum, your dad, your mate, doesn't mean that's the right and best route for you to go down. I think your gut feeling is a very powerful device. Often you know what the right thing to do is and you know what you need to do, but I feel like especially with the more social media and everyone's got an opinion, it's so easy to be influenced by our peers. So my advice is be true to yourself, know your worth, and don't compare yourself to other people because it's a hiding to nowhere in my experience.
That's bloody beautiful. Yeah,
Thank you.
but what a nice way to end. So I think, let's call it as an end there, but obviously the discussion keeps going. Thank you, Georgia, so much for being our first exceptional podcast guest. Been an absolute privilege, and I can't wait to follow your journey. And I encourage everyone to check out your TED Talk because it definitely made me reevaluate and see things from a different perspective.
Thank you. Likewise. And thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Cheers, everyone, and hopefully see you for the next one.